The Supreme Court has ruled on the Trump ballot case. And
the Supreme Court has just handed down an historic ruling concerning Colorado's attempt to bar Donald Trump from the presidential ballot in that state.
Breaking news from the Supreme Court about former President Donald Trump. The High Court just said moments ago that Mr. Trump can stay on this year's presidential ballot in Colorado.
The U.S. Supreme Court rules in favor of former President Donald Trump in his appeal of a Colorado ballot disqualification. That applies to Colorado. In all likelihood, it will apply to other states as well.
The state had argued he should be disqualified under the 14th Amendment's insurrection ban because of his actions leading up to the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. But the Supreme Court just moments ago saying Donald Trump will remain on the ballot.
They essentially say the judgment of the Colorado Supreme Court that he could be kicked off the ballot in this manner does not stand, has to be overturned. Now, it's a per curiam opinion, which the Latin for that is sort of the court speaks. It's supposed to be sort of a unified voice. But we do, as I'm looking through here, have some additional folks who wrote, Justice Barrett, and I believe Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson. They write concurrences as well. So they may have gotten to this in a different way, but I don't see any dissents here. So it sounds like the court as a whole is agreed that whatever happened with Colorado, it was not the proper framework to use here. There is discussion at the end of the main decision that says, you know, there would be essentially a patchwork across the states. This was one of the worries that the justices had, and the questions that came together in argument were, what happens if we tell one state they can do this? The Chief Justice said, what if one state decides, okay, I'm kicking off a Republican, another state says, okay, I'm kicking off a Democrat, and then we get down to just a handful of states that actually have all of the candidates' names on the ballot? What would that do to this country? So it sounds like the majority of the court has come together in this voice to say what happened in Colorado is not correct. It sounds like they're saying states don't have this power, but essentially this is something that should be left to Congress.
A really consequential decision has just been handed down. Paula Reed, the court has made a decision.
This is a win for former President Trump. Here, the Supreme Court has reversed a ruling from the Colorado Supreme Court that would have removed former President Trump from the ballot under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, the so-called insurrectionist ban. Now, this is very much what we expected based on what we saw about a month ago during oral argument. Justices on both sides of the aisle appeared skeptical of Colorado's argument that Trump could be removed by the state under the 14th Amendment. So this is a huge win. It means that former President Trump will appear on the primary ballot. And this applies not only to Colorado, but also to states across the country. Because as we've seen, many states have tried this way of removing Trump from the ballot. It was considered a novel, long shot way to bump Trump out of eligibility for the White House. But we've only seen Colorado, Maine, and Illinois actually remove him. But here, the Supreme Court, as you know, the final word on constitutional questions, saying no, it is up to Congress, not the states, to do this. So an enormous win for former President Trump.
This is so significant, Paula. We knew in the 2.5-hour argument that was had that they were leaning in this direction. They asked the question, as you remember, the moment in time of, well, why should Colorado be the one to decide for the rest of the nation a matter of such consequence? And there was some pushback on whether a state could actually do this. It seems like they want Congress to actually make the decision because of ambiguity, maybe a little bit of vagueness, but this is very important because he was already still on the ballot, as you know. But the idea of them saying this is for Congress to look at, not us, means they don't want politics in the Supreme Court right now.
That's exactly right. And even though I'm sure they'd love to avoid all of these Trump-related cases, this is the first of at least two big Trump-related cases they're taking down.
Because immunity is still on the horizon.
Exactly. In a month and a half, we'll be back on April 22nd. They're going to hear oral arguments about whether former President Trump has immunity to protect him from the special counsel's federal election subversion case. But let's look at the timing here, right? It was almost a month ago that we were here for oral arguments. This was a case that they were considering on an expedited basis. I don't know about you, but I was a little surprised that it took them a month to unanimously do what we expected them to do.
Especially because they took the case up very quickly, right? It wasn't that they were in the case of immunity. They said 7 weeks from now, we'll hear something. In this case, they said we're going to hear it pretty quickly. They had a pretty easy turnaround. But this is the day before Super Tuesday as well. He's already on the ballot. As you mentioned, other states are wanting to see if they have a leg to stand on here. But Paula, the idea that the Supreme Court was going to make this decision was not so shocking. But they took that case up in the first instance, which some was surprising.
It was surprising because so many people thought this was such a novel legal theory that you weren't really going to successfully be able to remove Trump based on this obscure provision of the 14th Amendment that was enacted after the Civil War. But then we saw in the state of Colorado, even the courts within that state were split on whether this applied to presidents. But once you got that Supreme Court, a Colorado ruling that removed him, it really seemed inevitable that the Supreme Court would have to take this up, because even in states that had tried this and they didn't remove him, they left the door open. And without the Supreme Court clarifying this question, we would likely see litigation and arguably a lot of chaos and confusion throughout the presidential contest. So this also, of course, applies to the general election. And for anyone that's confused, former President Trump will appear on primary ballots, and assuming he is the nominee, as we expect him to be, on the general election ballot. Very much expected, but an enormous win for the former president.
It really is. And remember, to go back, it was a trial court in Colorado who made a finding surrounding insurrection without having an actual jury trial. He has not been charged with insurrection, not been convicted of insurrection in a criminal proceeding. The Colorado Supreme Court was the one that said, yes, actually he should be removed from the actual ballot. Now, Paula, though, this is going to suggest that because there's been no finding, there's been no ruling or conviction, this might stand across the nation.
Yeah, that's what we expect, that this will be the final word. Because again, when you saw even within the state of Colorado, the courts didn't agree, but the highest court did remove him. We also saw in Maine they removed him, and Illinois as well. But